How did we get here? How did we go from an average size of megabytes to hardware equivalent sizes of gigabytes of game storage? The very first game console, Magnavox Odyssey, went live in 1972. Despite being a brand new innovation in electronics, the product didn't really get that much sales and eventually failed. That is most likely because the sales department of the product didn't know how to properly market it. The Magnavox Odyssey didn't use ROM cartridges, but instead just used game cards, which essentially were cards composed of printed circuit boards being plugged into a console. In order to play the games, you would have to not only place the game cards in, but also put on a plastic overlay onto your TV. With the ability to move small little cubes on the screen, it was enough to give the illusion of a game being played in the 1970s. The very first ROM cartridge system, Fairchild's Channel F, was released in 1976. The cartridge sizes could range all the way up to 4 kilobytes per game. Once again, the games were incredibly simple, but this time they didn't require any additional overlays to be put on screen. Cartridges started to increase substantially as time went on. With the famous 1983 console release of the NES, cartridges could already go up to a whole megabyte. And with the innovations of 16-bit electronics, consoles such as the SNES could already go up to 4 megabytes in storage. And with the famous release of the very first PlayStation, which began to use CDs instead of cartridges, games could already be going over the 1 gigabyte mark. And going all the way up to the present, games on average, whether PC or console, are ranging from around 20 to over 100 gigabytes in storage. Now, with all the history done, let's ask the question of why these game sizes have gotten so big. The answer is obviously simple, because of electronic and technological advancements and innovations. But then let's redefine the question to what determines the size of a game. This comes down to 5 main points: colors, resolutions and textures, sounds, game assets, and finally, the hardware in general. Most of the games back before would use an average color palette of 512 colors instead of the current one, which is 16 million. This made game sizes increase, but nowhere as near as resolutions and textures did. Consoles before would use very low scale resolutions, such as 256 x 224, whereas right now, an average size of 1920 x 1080 is almost a necessity. The reason for such resolution increases is because of the way TVs and screens have gotten bigger and better as time went on. Sounds have made a very huge impact on the capacity of games. There's a reason why really all game consoles such as the Magnavox Odyssey didn't have any sound at all. Not only was sounds incredibly capacity heavy, but they also required a sound card in order to be played, which most consoles didn't even have. And not only that, the very first game consoles that used sounds were most of the time in either 8 or 16-bit. Game assets are an obvious hit onto the size of a game. With most of today's games being always in 3D, meant that game assets in general need a lot of additional space. And let's finish things off with the most obvious out of all of them, which is hardware. Most consoles before would either have very simple hardware or none at all. For example, the Magnavox Odyssey didn't even have any memory, nor did it have a functioning CPU. All that it had that even booted the damn thing up were transistors, resistors, and capacitors. But as time went on, more game consoles would start to get better and better hardware, going from sound cards and CPUs to genuine GPUs that began to be developed. Game storage has had an absolutely rocky history, to say the least. And with constant new innovations and game consoles being developed, who knows just what average hard disk will be needed to even have a few games on. But one thing that I want you to take away after this video is that the history of games has gotten incredibly far. All the way up from a few genuine cubes dancing on screen to genuine games that simulate reality. And also the fact that Activision is adding hundreds of additional gigabytes to their games from God knows where.